Hey, what's going on, everybody? Joe Menza here, and we're going to do another little painting here. Bit of a, I don't know, fall lake scene type thing. This is 10 by 14 Fabriano. I'm using the usual colors. I'll have them listed in the description. And I'm just putting a initial wetting down at the maybe top 3/4 of the sheet. Now, people have been having problems with this. If you give me your feedback and let me know how you're getting along, I can come back and I can give those tips in these videos. And some people have said their water was, or their paper was too wet initially. And what you should do is look at the sheen on the paper. I mean, if it's really running and dripping, then let it absorb a little bit into the paper before you start adding any paint so it doesn't run down, doesn't get too wet. Give it about, 20, 30 seconds or so. Now I'm adding a raw sienna, yellow ochre type wash here just to get some variation in the colors. It's a good blender for, your future layers that you're going to add on. So we call this our initial wash, sort of a unifier of the paints. And so now I'm coming in with some ultramarine blue mixed with just a little bit of Payne's gray. And so I'm going to put that for the sky, and then I'm also going to put that for the water as an initial wash. A little more traditional. And I'm just going to try to leave a little areas of light. I'm going a little bit darker because I'm going to blend this with a little bit of white, and I'm going to just try to make sort of a nice soft sky. When you're first starting out, just go in and have fun and think of things as an experiment. I mean, always think in the back of your mind, hey, you're an artist, and what you do, it's going to be the greatest. I mean, just have confidence in yourself. But at the same time, you have to hold back a little bit for the process and think to yourself, okay, some of this is experimentation. There's always a little bit of experimentation so that you're going to learn from this painting and take it into your next one. Bringing in a little bit more blue here, just kind of blending it a little bit. I like to make it a little bit darker in the sky on the sides and the corners just to pull you into the center of the painting. And I'm adding the same blue on the bottom. It's going to be the basis for our water. So when you approach a painting, your first thing is going to be really putting in sort of these backdrop elements. Think about it like setting the stage. You're going to be putting in, these are your background elements, and you're going to have sort of a sky, a foreground, and a middle ground. And then you're going to start laying your things on top. When you set up your house, you put the flooring in, you paint the walls. That's what we're doing. We're setting up the backdrop when we do that, and you can let that dry. Here I've edited it so you don't have to see any hair dryers or anything. Sometimes I'll just sit and I'll go have a cup of coffee or something. Now I'm putting in some cloud formations, and I'm making them darker. This isn't how they're ultimately going to look because I'm going to put a little bit of white, and sometimes when you do that, it really brings the color down. So this is exaggerated for that purpose. And sometimes you have to look at something and say, I like this just the way it is. I really like the way that's coming about, and alter your vision. One thing that I do is I'll look at different elements in nature, or I'll look at photographs or whatever, and I'll try to let them make an impression in my mind, and then I'll go and I'll paint it from imagination. It's something I enjoy. If you like painting directly from photos or a subject, then by all means take that route. For me, I just like to get in there and start painting. It's probably not the technical right way to do it, but I like going just from imagination, seeing how things turn out. Sometimes it's a surprise even to myself. And again, you can take that learning process from one painting into the next painting. And remember, you try to keep a file in your mind that, okay, I remember when I did this, I liked this, how it came out, I liked how that came out. Every painting that you do, there's going to be an aspect of it that you don't like. But my thing here is I don't want people struggling if you're following my videos. I'm happy when someone says, hey, I followed and look, it turned out very nicely. My purpose for doing this is because I know when I was first starting out, I watched a lot of videos and things, and some people explain things better than others. I know those things that when it kicked in for me, and I had a realization, those are the things I want to pass on to you so that you enjoy and you progress as quickly as possible. Because when people paint today, and do things, people want immediate gratification, really. We've got prime shipping, people want things quick. You got to practice this. I mean, there's just no way around it. And the biggest thing is water. I've put in a little yellow for the trees on the side, and then I've got a little bit of a mountain I've put in, or hills. Let's just say hills. Those aren't really mountains. And I'm doing a little green, yellow, and ultramarine blue mixed in just to vary it up a little bit. But I would suggest, if you're starting out, to take your brush and fill it with water and experiment with that, and then blot it against a towel, experiment with paint on that where it's half full of water, and then squeeze the water out and then put paint on there, and you'll have really the three ranges of amounts of water on your brush. And I think that'll get you to an understanding quickly, and practice with that. Another thing is bringing these elements together. You have to be able to paint a sky, a tree, a mountain, grass, and all of these elements eventually, as you do more and more paintings, they'll come together. You can sit down and you can practice trees by themselves, you can practice mountains by themselves, but eventually it will come together for you. So now the trees, I've mixed in a little light red, I've mixed in a little cad yellow hue, a little yellow ochre to get some good variation on the trees. Now you'll notice I let the paint run down, and I've also sprayed it a little bit to get that's a setup for the reflections in the water. And if you do that while it's wet and you blend it, it will look nice once you're finished. Initially, if you're just starting off, try not to go for too much like reflections in the water, shadows. Save that kind of for later. Just really practice on the elements, practice on the trees, and when you see a painting, you're like, oh, I really want to do that. Really, when you jump in, you should be saying, I really want to, over time, and kind of give yourself some realistic expectations. Now I'm putting in a little bit of a base at the bottom of the mountain, so now we're going to start putting in a little bit more foreground elements, which will base the trees to the ground, anchor the trees to the ground, the mountain, or the hills. And then I'm just going to touch up some things as I go, kind of brighten up these trees, kind of randomize the tops with some loose bristles just to make it look like there's more leaves there. Again, it's still into the backdrop before we put on some forefront elements. Okay, so now I'm going to give it a little shot with the spray bottle just to keep it wet. And I'm just going to take my card and I'm just going to use that to make little textures in the distance. Not going to do too much scraping in this one. Very lightly with the card. And you can make some textures. Don't scrape real hard. Unless you're doing rocks, then you can scrape a little harder. So I've just scraped in some tree branches and trunks, and against this particular color it has a nice effect to it. And give that a little spray. Okay, so I'm just going to scrape in a little bit of foreground, or just get a little texture at the base of these where these trees are. I like to give it a little spray. Sometimes it blends things a little bit. And just going to blend that in a little bit, blending in the reflections with a clean, dry brush. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to start fooling around with this sky. Now this is, if you've got a good sky going, don't tamper with it, but this is what I intended to do all along. And I'm going to start blending this in and creating just a nice, soft, little bit cloudy sky. So I'm kind of blotting in, I've wetted it a little bit again, and I'm kind of blotting in an area. It looks messed up right now, but no worries. Just coming back in with a little bit more dark. It will really lighten up with the white, so that's why I'm kind of shading in a little more dark. I'm giving it a little spray to keep it open. I'm just kind of blending that a little bit. Again, more blending. Clean goat hair type brush. Soft brushes work best for blending on watercolor. Want a little bit of area of lightness above, or light above the hills. Kind of dabbing that with a cloth a little bit. And really, honestly, the reason I'm doing this and I'm using white and different things is, you see how a lot of people do their skies. They do them very easily, really. I mean, it's very simplistic just to put a little water and then just a few strokes with the brush. But I want to do something different. Kind of want my stuff to look a little different than everyone else's. So just kind of find your thing. So one of my things is I've just been incorporating white because really not a lot of people do it. So I've got my tube of titanium white gouache, M gram, Really like their gouache. And I'm blending it in with my finger. Sorry, my arm is in the way. I'm blending it in with my finger. Gouache is interesting when it's wet, and it really blends in with what you're doing. The issue with it is it becomes a milky white, almost gray. So it takes a little bit of practice. And you see how you can get a nice blend and create some nice cloud patterns. The issue is when it dries, it will dry much lighter. So you have to use a lot of it, but if you use too much, then you end up with just a white sky. It looks great when you initially put it on, but then it does dry back. And then you run into the danger of when you blend it, it carries into the other colors and then it kind of washes them out. But it's fun. I have a fun time doing it. I give it a little spray, a little blend. I want to retain some of that blue at the top. Now you see the interest. You see where I was kind of going for. Again, still just kind of blending to get it to where I want it to be. Sort of wispy clouds with a brightness at the top. And if you lose that bright edge, then you can come back with a little bit more white at the very top and blend it with the rest of the cloud. I really like clouds. When I was a kid, I used to look at them and just kind of imagine having a castle or something built just out of clouds and living in there. Just a big billowy cloud. Just want to get a little bit more on this part here near the tree. That's why I put it on either with my finger or something like that, or right out of the tube, because I want to get a lot on there. If you're having a particular issue, I've had some requests to do things like foreground and things like that. I'll try to address those in upcoming videos. If you follow along with any videos that I do, let me know how it turns out for you and where areas that were tricky for you. And I'll try to focus on them in future videos. Now, as you can see, we have a really nice sky going. It's interesting, I think. I'm going to add some darker branches in this tree here. What I recommend doing is just watching as many videos as you can, picking up little tips and tricks, and just trying to incorporate them into your own painting. And then ultimately let your style shine through. Find something about the way that you paint. Everybody has their, as you go along, will develop their own look. You'll start to go in that direction over time. I think the thing that intrigues people when they watch these type of videos is, oh, I'd love to be able to paint something like that. I know it was for me when I used to watch Bob Ross back in the 90s. And even through today, it's like, oh, I'd like to be able to do, I want mine to look like that. That's a good thing to shoot for, but at the same time, shoot for having fun and know that your outcome, have some realistic expectations so you're not disappointed. Definitely don't want anyone to be discouraged and say, well, I couldn't. You know, if you do a few, you'll see within, a dozen paintings, you'll start to see a little bit of improvement. And the more you do, if you can paint an hour a day, if you have that kind of time, that's the best, I think. If you can paint 3 days a week, an hour at a time, just go off to the side, spend an hour, and enjoy the process. I'm putting a few more branches on the tree to the right. And if you like this type of style, this wet into wet, fast and loose method, come on over to our Facebook group. It's Ron Ranson Disciples. Look it up. We've got a lot of people over there. A lot of the people that make videos on YouTube are in our group, and they participate and they post their videos when they go up, and you can ask questions, and you can have people give you advice on what you need to do in a painting. And we've got getting well over 600 members there now. It's for this style of painting, though. It's not like a big watercolor group where, we paint birds and animals and all kinds of things. It's specifically large brush landscape painting. See the way those branches now, I've made those dark, and they contrast against that little bit of sky that's there. So this is mainly where you're going to get into detail work. You want to make, if you're using a rigger brush, like I have a number 3, you make the paint and water very liquidy, like an ink, because that brush doesn't hold much. And then you use the tip and you sort of flick it along to make branches. I think when I first started, I just took one sheet and I just kept working on making branches. And I'm okay at it. People say they like my trees, but I can't say that I put a lot of real effort into making them exact. It's a lazy man's kind of way to paint, and a lazy woman's way to paint too, which is for me. I don't really want to narrow laser into, doing tiny details. There are people, oil paintings, this and that. I was at a painting group one time that I went over in my town, and a guy was working on a scene from Venice. It was amazing. He was had the guy in the little boat, and he barely did anything when I was there from watching him, but it was all details. And it's like each week he came once a week and would work on this painting and had it stored there, and had been working on it for a few months. I don't have the patience for that. That's a lot of people tell me a lot of times. I just don't have the patience. Really, it's not a matter of patience, because I'm no patience on my end, but it's the passion for it, And if you really dig it and you get in there and you start painting and you just, that's all you're focused on and it's therapeutic. That's, it's just you focused on that and you're trying to achieve something. It's your own challenge. No one's really judging. No one's really, it's your, you set your own pace, your own goals. So now I'm just coming in and I'm coming with more of the darks. And that's really, you want to save that more toward the end and start putting in darks or shadows, or this is the time that you would do that. When you put those little darks in, they'll make other things stand out even more. A little bit of the shadows now I'm working on. Shadows from the tree trunks. That's just burnt umber, a little bit of Payne's gray, and ultramarine blue. In this method, we use a palette of maybe 6 or 7 colors: ultramarine blue, Payne's gray, light red, cadmium yellow or lemon yellow. And those are really your basic colors. And then you can vary some of them. Some people use burnt sienna. I don't really use that one. Alizarin crimson hue. That one I don't use a whole lot of, but you have to make sure when you're using alizarin crimson, it's light fast. If you use, there's some brands that they'll fade over time. But the Cotman colors, it's a hue, so it doesn't have, it's light, the light fast is excellent on it. Sometimes I'll use Van Dyke brown. I'll use cobalt blue, or I'll use cerulean blue. But I don't have those on my main palette. And I don't use any greens. A lot of artists that I know that do this method, they stay away from the greens. The greens that are out there, a lot of them look kind of gaudy looking. It's just better to make your own blues and reds and vary them as you go. If you buy like sap green, you'll see, you know, oil painters using sap green. If you mix that with like a yellow, or you can do that. I've tried a lot of different ones. Olive green and Viridian is one that's just way out there. It's good for doing ocean water, but it'll make things look very artificially green. It depends on what you're painting too. I mean, this palette is good for outdoor scenes. If you're doing cityscapes, you might find yourself varying into other colors. So now I'm coming in with more of the yellow, and I'm brightening up the tops of these trees to create some light. Cad yellow hue and lemon yellow, those colors, you can put them on out of the tube, very little water, and they go over other paints nicely. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just sort of stippling that in there. By stippling, you're drying your brush, squeezing out the water, and dabbing the bristles right into some neat paint. You do have to be a little careful though, because you will get blobs of paint if you're not careful. So you kind of really want to smash that into the brush so that it's broken down. It's not like you're putting big blobs on there, because when the light hits your painting, those blobs will reflect and you'll see. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but for me, it's just not something I care to have. Same thing, you use Payne's gray. If you use a lot of Payne's gray or blacks, they tend to reflect light. So I'm doing the same thing on this side. I'm making some lighter at the top where the light would be striking those leaves. Kind of fall scenes. I've mixed in some in the lower part of the tree on the left, as you can see. I've mixed in some light red there. Light red we should probably talk about. If you're looking at colors of paints, it's one of the few you're going to find in like the Cotman, Winsor & Newton range. There's certain, like Daniel Smith, you'd have to find an equivalent to the light red. I guess it's predominantly more like for English landscapes, from what I've been told. So it's kind of a color that's exclusive to that Winsor & Newton line. Mixes great and creates great oranges with your yellows. A little bit of a longer video again this time. I hope you've enjoyed watching and you've been able to pick up a few things. Hope everybody's New Year's off to a good start. Putting a little bit more white in here and bringing this down a little bit, blending that down in a little bit. I almost feel like there's redundant lines there. If you look at the cloud on top, then the one below, it's almost... One thing I try to avoid is redundancy, something where it's like there's 2 or 3 lines. It just looks unnatural. Every painting is both a piece of unique artwork and a skilled attempt at bringing out the vision in your mind and looking for a good result. But it's also a learning experience each time you do it. Unlike working in, say, like a job or a field. I used to be in printing. I used to run printing presses. And once you get a system in place, I mean, it's pretty much the same job. You know, you go to your job and you learn things as time goes on, but there's something about doing the paintings that it's more of that learning experience. You know, I picked up the paper here because I left some white on the bottom. It'll probably be hidden by a mat, but I don't like to leave too much white on the edges. I never know how something's going to be matted or displayed. So when you go into a painting, even after you've done many, there's a little apprehension. Is this going to turn out the way I want? You start painting and it's like, okay, I'm on the road and then you get to the sort of the midpoint where you're like, I don't know. And then you hit that turning point, and then every now and then it turns out to where, well, I'm not real happy with the way that turned out. And then there's other times where you hit it and you're like, oh, that real one really turned out good. And that's just going to happen. I encourage people to share them, show your work. For me, it's like half of the experience, to share and post it out there and see what other people think. Like sharing a little bit of yourself. I've made a little bit darker to the water on the bottom just to kind of bring the eyes back more toward the center. That'll blend. I'll hit it with a spray bottle, and I just want that to be a little bit darker toward the bottom. That's ultramarine blue and a little alizarin crimson. Now at this point, I'm just touching up a few little things as I sit back and I look at it. Just little details I think would benefit. My go-to tools are the spray bottle, the plastic card, a paper towel. Now I just want to create a sort of a softness to the reflections on the bottom. I like to go for a sense of realism without killing myself doing it. Just adding a little bit to the land there. So now here I'm just spraying it to keep it open again and just blending the water. I don't really want any hard lines in there. I've got a nice glow of the light coming through the trees and hitting into the water. And also a little darker, so those, those are in shade, I guess we'd say. And you can see that's all blending together nicely. And now I'm going to go to my white, and I'm just going to enhance the water a little bit along the shoreline and put in a little bit of of white for the water. Again, neat out of the tube. No water mixed in there, except whatever moisture happens to be on the paper. Using my little goat hair brush to blend. I have a whole pad of paper here. This paper is heavy enough that I didn't feel I had to clip it or anything. If you're using an easel or a board, you know, you can clip it with those bullnose clips. So I've put a little bit of white into the water. You can also lift water or paint off by putting a little water on your brush and running it across. I've chosen to use a little bit of white. Maybe it's a little bit of reflection from what's in the sky. I'm coming back with some of my whites just to brighten up the cloud tops. And just a little spray so I can blend those. I don't want to disturb too much of that color underneath. Just blotting out a little bit, softening and blotting. You can spray on with a spray bottle, and if you blot it with a towel, it'll take off little bits. Just creates nice little variations. I'm just going to touch up this tree here. Again, a little bit layering of the cad yellow hue. I'm pretty pleased with this one. It's got a good balance of colors. Vary your leaves. If you use blue and yellow and Payne's gray, add a little bit more blue, add a little bit more yellow, and just keep varying that. Don't wash your brush. Well, that is it. I think I've done enough with this one. I do hope you enjoyed it. And leave me a comment. And if you're not a subscriber, subscribe. Let's do a zoom in and look at some of the details here. Thank you for watching, everybody. I do appreciate it.